to check the names to avoid, then write the story. The band names are Lauren, Richard, Eleanor, Diane, Natalie, Marcus, Vanessa, Simone. I'll create new characters: Cora, narrator, 28, hospital pharmacist, Aunt Brenda, Villain, Uncle Pete, complicit, Grandma Ruth, deceased, lest inheritance. If my aunt says one more word about my grandmother's money, I will stop being polite about it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look up from my coffee. I just set the mug down on the kitchen counter, turned around, and looked at my aunt, really looked at her, until she stopped talking mid-sentence. My Uncle P was standing behind her near the refrigerator. He found something very interesting to study on the floor tiles. She had just made a comment about how the estate account was sitting idle, and how it would make so much more sense for someone actively managing the family property to have access to it. Someone like her. "I'll handle the estate myself," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Every penny of it. She smiled the way she always smiled when she thought she was winning. Tight, controlled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes. "We'll see, Cora," she said. "We'll see." That was 6 weeks before I walked into a title company in Raleigh and watched her sign her own name onto a federal fraud charge. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. My grandmother, Ruth, died on a Tuesday in late October. She was 81 years old, sharp until the very end, and she had the kind of quiet stubbornness that I always thought skipped a generation and landed directly in me. She left behind a paid-off house in Cary, North Carolina, a savings account with $87,000, and a handwritten note tucked inside her Bible that said simply, "Cora knows what to do with it." The official will back that up. Everything went to me, her only grandchild on my mother's side. My mother had passed 4 years earlier, which meant I was it. The last direct line. My Aunt Brenda was my grandmother's daughter-in-law. Technically not even blood. She had married into the family 20 years ago, built herself into the center of every holiday, every Sunday dinner, every family decision. And somewhere along the way, she had started acting like the estate was a shared asset. Like proximity to my grandmother for 2 decades had earned her a percentage. I was 28 years old. I worked as a hospital pharmacist in Durham. I had a studio apartment, a car with 74,000 miles on it, and a savings account I had built carefully, shift by shift, over 5 years. My grandmother's inheritance wasn't a windfall. It was a foundation. The difference between renting forever and actually owning something. Between treading water and finally getting my feet on the ground. My aunt knew exactly what that money meant to me. That's why she moved on it before the funeral flowers had finished wilting. I found out the way I found out most things, quietly, on my own, while everyone else assumed I wasn't paying attention. I was reviewing my credit report on a Thursday evening, which I did every month without fail. It was a habit I picked up from a financial literacy seminar at the hospital 3 years ago, and one I had never once regretted. Everything looked normal until I got to the hard inquiry section. There was a pull I didn't recognize. A mortgage pre-qualification run by a lender I had never heard of, time-stamped 9 days after my grandmother's death, 4 days before the estate had even cleared probate. I sat very still for a moment. I read the lender name again. Then I opened a new tab and looked them up. They were a private mortgage company out of Charlotte, the kind that specialized in estate-backed loans, bridging inheritance assets as collateral before full legal transfer. The kind of company you'd only know to contact if you were planning to move fast on someone else's money. I didn't call my aunt. I didn't call my uncle. I called my grandmother's estate attorney, a woman named Patricia, who I had spoken to twice since the will reading. I told her what I found. She went quiet for a moment in a way that told me she was choosing her next words very carefully. She said I should pull a full copy of the pre-qualification application if I could, and that she would reach out to the probate court to flag the inquiry. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling of my apartment and let myself think about something I had been avoiding for years. My aunt's relationship with money had always made me uneasy. She talked about it constantly. Not in the way people talk about their own finances, but in the way people talk about something they feel entitled to but don't have. She had made comments at Christmas about how large estates in North Carolina were often tied up inefficiently. She had said once, when she thought I was out of earshot, that it was a shame my mother hadn't been more practical about what would happen to Ruth's house. At the time, I had filed it away and moved on. Now I was pulling the file back out and reading it differently. She hadn't been making conversation. She had been building a case. I remembered something specific then. I was 22, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table doing grad school applications while my aunt cleared the dishes. My grandmother had been telling a story about the house, about how she'd paid it off early after my grandfather died, about the pride she took in owning it free and clear. My aunt had laughed and said, "Ruth, you should let that equity work for you. A house just sitting there is money just sitting there." My grandmother had smiled and changed the subject. But after my aunt left, she'd looked at me and said, "That woman counts other people's money in her sleep, Cora. Don't ever leave your account numbers somewhere she can find them." I had laughed at the time. I wasn't laughing now. The pre-qualification application required personal information I had never given my aunt directly. My full legal name, my social security number, my date of birth, my current address. She would have had my name and address easily. Family, holidays, mailed cards. My date of birth, the same. But my SSN. I had one copy of that document in a fireproof lockbox in my apartment closet. It had not left my possession. Then I remembered the estate paperwork. When my grandmother's will entered probate, all the beneficiary documentation got filed with the county clerk's office. The forms included my SSN as the primary beneficiary. That filing was technically public record. You had to know to look, and you had to go downtown to request it, but it was there. My aunt had done her homework. I had underestimated her. I didn't underestimate her again. Patricia and I met in person the following week. She had already spoken with the probate court. The mortgage inquiry had been run using my identifying information as collateral documentation, submitted alongside a letter claiming I had verbally pre-authorized the estate to be used as backing for a property purchase. There was no such authorization. The letter had my name on it. It was not my signature. Patricia used the word forgery in a very calm, professional tone that somehow made it worse. She explained what she believed had happened. My aunt has identified the estate timeline, found the public probate filing, used my SSN and the estate value to approach a private lender, submitted a fabricated authorization letter, and was attempting to get a pre-qualified mortgage offer locked in before the inheritance fully transferred to me. At which point she would either pressure me to co-sign the actual purchase, or in a worst-case scenario, attempt to present the pre-qualification as evidence of my agreement to use the estate funds as down payment collateral on a property I had never agreed to buy. The property, Patricia had confirmed, was a lake house listed at $340,000 in Fouquet Varina. My aunt had been talking about that lake for as long as I could remember. I thanked Patricia, drove home, and sat in my car in the parking garage for 11 minutes before I went inside. I wasn't panicking. I was thinking. I was sorting the situation into categories the way I sorted medication orders at the hospital. What is urgent, what is dangerous, what requires immediate intervention, and what requires documentation before I touch anything? The answer was clear. I needed documentation first, and I needed my aunt to believe nothing had changed. She called me that Friday. Her voice was warm the way a gas burner is warm, pleasant until you touch it. She asked how I was settling the estate, whether I'd spoken to any financial advisors, whether I had thought about what I was going to do with the house. I said I was still processing everything. I said I appreciated her thinking of me. She said she and my uncle had actually been exploring some properties of their own lately. Lake properties, very exciting, and that she'd love to talk to me sometime about estate liquidity, because she had learned so much going through the process herself. She said she knew a lender who could explain how inheritance-backed financing worked and that it might be smart for me to understand my options before I made any decisions. I said that sounded really helpful. I said I'd love to hear more. She paused for half a second, just half, like she wasn't sure if I meant it. Then she recovered and said she'd be in touch soon. I hung up and opened my laptop. I had work to do. Patricia had already filed a fraud alert with the major credit bureaus on my behalf and flagged the forged authorization letter with the North Carolina Secretary of State's office. But I needed more. I needed a paper trail that was undeniable, documented, and time-stamped before my aunt made her next move. I started with the lender. I looked up their public-facing loan portal. When I entered my email address, the one my aunt would have found on estate paperwork, the system recognized it. She had used it to create an account in my name. I clicked Forgot Password. The reset link went to my phone. I was inside the account in under 2 minutes. The dashboard showed a pre-qualification offer for $187,000, flagged as pending final authorization. The Documents tab had a PDF of the authorization letter Patricia had already referenced. I opened the audit trail in the document. Every digital signature platform logs metadata, the IP address of the device that opened and signed the document, the timestamp, the browser. My name appeared on the signature line. Below it, the IP address was recorded. I didn't need to run a trace. I recognized the format as a residential static IP, the kind assigned by a home internet provider. I took a screenshot. I saved the audit trail PDF. I downloaded every document in the portal, changed the account password, and created a folder on my desktop called simply Documentation. Then I called Patricia and gave her everything. 2 days later, my aunt called again. This time she was moving faster. She said the sellers on the lake house had accepted an offer but needed proof of financing within the week to hold the closing. She said her own financing wasn't quite covering what they needed, and she wondered, very casually, almost as an afterthought, whether I would be willing to come to the closing on Thursday to sign a document releasing the estate hold on the pre-qualification so the lender could finalize her loan. She said it was just a formality. She said it would take 20 minutes and it would mean so much to her and my uncle. I knew exactly what that document was. It wasn't a release form. It was a co-borrower agreement that would attach my name, my SSN, and the estate valuation to her mortgage. If I signed it, I would be legally responsible for a $340,000 property I had never agreed to purchase. The estate funds would be flagged as contributed collateral. My inheritance would disappear into her lake house and the lender would have my signature on file to prove I had consented. I told her I would be there. She made a sound I can only describe as relieved. She said she knew she could count on me. She said my grandmother would be proud of how well we were all taking care of each other. I got off the phone and sat with that for a moment. My grandmother, who had specifically written my name in her Bible. My grandmother, who had warned me about this exact person being invoked as justification for stealing from me. I called Patricia that evening. We had already prepared for this. She had been in contact with the North Carolina Department of Justice's Consumer Protection Division and had filed a formal complaint on my behalf regarding the forged authorization letter. She had documentation from the lender's own records showing the account creation date, the IP address, and the fraudulent authorization. She had my credit report with the unauthorized inquiry. She had the probate records confirming I had never authorized use of the estate. On Thursday morning, before I drove to the title company, I would also file a report with the FTC and bring a notarized identity theft affidavit. The title company was in a glass-fronted office park off Highway 64 in Cary, 10 minutes from my grandmother's house. I had driven past that neighborhood 100 times. I parked in the gas lot and sat in my car for a moment looking at the building. Then I got out. The conference room had the kind of fluorescent-lit cleanliness that made everything feel more official than it was. Long table, chairs, a credenza with bottled water, and a small plate of cookies that nobody touched. The closing agent was a man named Gerald, mid-50s. Reading glasses on a lanyard. The kind of efficient professional who had done this 500 times and had no patience for anything unusual. My aunt was already there when I arrived. She was wearing a blue blazer I hadn't seen before, and she was talking to Gerald in a bright, social voice about the neighborhood, about the lake, about how long she and my uncle had dreamed about a place on the water. My uncle, Pete, was sitting beside her with his hands flat on the table looking at them. He had the expression of a man who had committed to something and was now waiting for it to be over. She looked up when I walked in. Something moved across her face, surprise maybe, or the edge of uncertainty. But she covered it immediately with a wide smile. "Cora," she said, "I'm so glad you made it." She came around the table and hugged me. I let her. I sat down across from them. I had a tote bag with me. Gerald didn't look up. We went through the preliminary documents. Gerald explained the structure of the closing, the mortgage finalization, the property deed transfer, the co-borrower authorization. He was professional and thorough. He did not seem particularly interested in the family dynamics in the room. Then he came to the key form. He placed it in front of my aunt and read from it. "This document certifies that all funds used for the down payment and closing costs are from personal assets and do not include borrowed funds, contested estate funds, or funds obtained through unauthorized use of third-party credit or identification. He asked her to verify and sign. My aunt picked up the pen. She didn't hesitate. She signed her name clearly, capped the pen, and set it down. Gerald nodded and turned to my uncle, who signed without looking up. Then Gerald slid the borrower authorization toward me. I didn't pick up the pen. I reached into my tote bag and set a manila folder on the table. The sound it made when it landed was not loud, but the room was quiet and Gerald looked up. "I can't sign this," I said. I looked at Gerald directly and kept my voice level. My name and social security number were used without my knowledge or consent to generate the pre-qualification backing this mortgage. I have documentation of the unauthorized account creation, the forged authorization letter, the IP address of the device used to access the lender portal, and a notarized FTC identity theft affidavit filed this morning. I slid the folder across to him. My aunt laughed. It was too fast and too high. "Cora," she said, "this is just a misunderstanding. We talked about this. You agreed to—" "I didn't agree to anything," I said. I kept my eyes on Gerald. The account was created in my name without my knowledge. The authorization letter bearing my name is forged. I have the lender's own audit trail showing the document was signed from an IP address registered to Brenda and Peter Calloway, not to me. On the date shown, I was working a 12-hour shift at Duke Regional Hospital. My time card records are in the folder. Gerald had opened a folder. He was reading. His expression did not change, but his pace slowed. My aunt stood up. Her voice had gone sharp and thin. "This is outrageous. This is a family matter." She looked at my uncle. "Pete, tell him." My uncle said nothing. He was still looking at the table. Gerald set down the first page and moved to the second. He read for another moment. Then he closed the folder, removed his reading glasses, and looked at my aunt with the expression of someone who had become very tired very quickly. "Ma'am," he said, "if the documentation in this folder is accurate, this closing cannot proceed. Using forged authorization and third-party identification to secure mortgage financing is federal bank fraud. I am required to report this to our compliance office immediately." My aunt's face went through several things in rapid succession. She looked at me. I looked back at her. Gerald picked up the phone on the credenza. She moved fast. She grabbed her purse, pushed back her chair, and walked toward the door. My uncle followed. I stood, gathered my folder, and walked out at a normal pace. In the hallway, she turned around. She was breathing hard. Her composure was gone completely. She came toward me with her hand out, reaching for the folder. "That documentation does not leave this building," she said. I stepped to the side. The hallway had a security camera mounted above the exit sign, which I had noticed when I walked in. I turned so that the camera had a clear view of both of us, and I held the folder against my chest with both hands. "Do not touch me," I said. She grabbed my arm anyway. I used the de-escalation training I'd done as part of the hospital's workplace safety program, stepped back, put a hand up between us, and said loudly and clearly, "I need you to stop." She was still reaching for the folder when the door at the end of the hallway opened and two people in security uniforms walked through, followed by Gerald. I released her arm and stepped back. "She came at me," she said. "I have it on camera." They looked at the camera. They looked at the camera. They looked at me. I handed Gerald one of the extra copies of the FTC affidavit I had brought specifically for this purpose. That evening, I filed a supplementary report with the Wake County Sheriff's Office documenting the physical confrontation in the hallway. Patricia had already been in contact with the DOJ Consumer Protection Division. The lender, once notified by Gerald's compliance team, opened their own internal investigation. Within 3 weeks, my aunt was formally referred to federal prosecutors for wire fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized use of financial identification. She was also charged with a misdemeanor assault following the hallway incident and a security footage confirming it. The lake house closing fell through. The sellers relisted. My aunt and uncle had to liquidate part of their 401k to cover the legal retainer fees. My uncle filed for a legal separation 4 months later. My aunt sent me one email during the investigation. It was 2 paragraphs long, and it said that I had destroyed the family over a misunderstanding and that my grandmother would be heartbroken. I read it once. Then I forwarded it to Patricia and didn't respond. The estate finalized without issue. The Carey house sold in 11 days, $3,000 over asking. The savings account transferred cleanly. I put 20% down on a condo in Durham 3 blocks from the hospital. I painted the kitchen the same shade of yellow my grandmother used in her house. I have a small print of her handwriting framed above my desk, the note from inside her Bible. Cora knows what to do with it. She was right. The investigators told me there was a protection under North Carolina law and mirrored at the federal level. That creates enhanced penalties for financial fraud targeting estate beneficiaries during the probate period specifically. My aunt had not known that. She had assumed the confusion of grief and paperwork would give her a window. She was right that it was a window. She was wrong about what was on the other side of it. I don't think about her much anymore. My uncle sent a card last Christmas. I didn't open it. Not in anger. I genuinely didn't need whatever was inside it. Some doors closed because they were broken all along and you just finally stopped walking through them. If you have ever had to be the one who protects what was left for you, even from the people who thought they deserved it more, leave a heart in the comments. And if you want to hear how the federal case resolved, make sure you're subscribed. I've thought a lot about what made my aunt believe she could do what she did. Not to justify it, there's nothing to justify, but because I think understanding it matters. She didn't wake up one morning and decide to commit federal fraud. She built toward it, slowly over years, convincing herself that proximity was the same as entitlement, that showing up at enough holidays, managing enough family dinners, being present in enough of my grandmother's last years somehow earned her a share of what my grandmother had worked her entire life to build. She told herself a story where she was owed something, and once you've told yourself that story long enough, you stop questioning it. That's the thing about choices made in self-deception. They don't feel like crimes to the person making them. They feel like corrections. But the world doesn't run on the stories we tell ourselves. It runs on what we actually do. And what my aunt actually did was forge my name, use my social security number without my consent, and walk into a title company prepared to attach my inheritance to a mortgage I had never agreed to. She did that. Not the story she told herself. Her. The actions were real and the consequences followed from the actions, not from the narrative. I was not smarter than her because I had access to better tools or more information. I was smarter than her because I had been paying attention for years before any of this happened. My grandmother taught me that. Not in a single lesson, not with dramatic advice, just by example. She checked her own finances every month until she was 80 years old. She kept records. She trusted carefully and verified everything. She was not suspicious by nature. She was precise by habit. That precision was the inheritance she gave me before she ever wrote my name in that Bible. When I found the credit inquiry on a Thursday evening and didn't panic, that wasn't bravery. It was discipline I had built over years. The habit of looking, the habit of documenting, the habit of acting from evidence rather than emotion. Brenda was counting on grief making me sloppy. She was counting on the chaos of losing my grandmother to create a window she could move through quickly. What she didn't account for was that I had been trained, by the woman she was trying to steal from, to close windows exactly like that. My Uncle Pete made his own choice. He sat at that table and said nothing. He signed the documents. He let it happen. I don't carry anger toward him anymore, but I don't carry sympathy either. Silence in the presence of harm is still a decision. He made his, and he lived with the consequences of it the same way my aunt lived with hers. What I want anyone watching this to understand is that intelligence without integrity eventually collapses under its own weight. My aunt was not unintelligent. She had researched the probate filing process, identified the public records, found the lender, constructed a plan. That took real effort and real thought. But she pointed all of it in the wrong direction, and when the moment came, it turned against her completely. The same audit trail she thought would legitimize her application was the thing that placed her at the scene. The same legal process she tried to use to trap me is the one that caught her. Integrity is not a limitation on what you can accomplish. It is the only thing that makes what you accomplish worth keeping. I painted my kitchen yellow the week I moved into my condo. Same shade my grandmother used. I think about her every morning when the light comes through the window and hits that wall. She didn't leave me money so I could be comfortable. She left me the proof that she believed I was capable of doing something real with it. I don't take that lightly. I never will.